During a memorable trip with my friends, including my brother Sammy and close friend Jacob, we decided to explore the rugged landscape between California and Mexico. The sun was shining brightly as we began our hike, our backpacks filled with essentials like water, snacks, and basic first aid supplies. This weekend getaway was not just about adventure. It was also a chance to spend quality time with friends. As we walked along the trail, laughter and stories filled the air. Each step brought a sense of joy as we immersed ourselves in the beautiful wilderness. The border area's unique charm was evident, with rugged hillsides, cacti, and occasional glimpses of wildlife. The open air, raw beauty of nature and companionship made the experience truly special. After a few hours of hiking, we decided to take a break near a rocky outcrop. As we sat down, I suddenly felt something unusual. That's when I heard Sammy's voice growing more intense as he pointed downwards. "Come look here," he exclaimed. We all turned to look in Sammy's direction, and what we saw was the most tragic sight of my life. There, hidden between the rocks and bushes, was a decomposed body. The sight took my breath away, and we stood there in shock, frozen in disbelief. It felt like a scene straight out of a movie, surreal and disturbing. We stood silent and stunned, trying to comprehend this grim reality. It quickly sank in that we needed to take action. I immediately called the authorities, providing them with our location and details about the incident. The dispatcher reassured us that help was on the way and instructed us to stay put. Time seemed to stand still. Each minute felt like an hour as we waited for the authorities to arrive. The once serene surroundings had turned eerily quiet. Realizing that we couldn't find any solace in this tragic situation, we turned our gaze away, hoping to calm our racing hearts. When the first responders arrived, their presence brought a mix of comfort and sorrow. The expressions on their faces reflected the grief and composure that came with their daily work. Police officers, forensic experts, and search teams began collaborating on the scene. We assisted them by providing every detail we could as the investigation unfolded. As the investigation progressed, small pieces of information began to surface. The forensic team meticulously examined the scene, gradually collecting clues. Before long, authorities reached a conclusion. The deceased individual was likely an undocumented immigrant attempting to cross the border. This realization deeply affected us. The harsh realities of desert conditions and the dangers of illegal border crossings painted a somber picture. We began to ponder the struggles and hardships that had led this individual to such a tragic fate. The weight of grief and humanity resonated within us profoundly. Once the investigation concluded and authorities took custody of the remains, we were allowed to continue our hike. However, a silence enveloped us, serving as a constant reminder of the tragic event we had witnessed. With each step, we felt the duality of human life and death, hope and despair. This hiking experience was one in which we had never encountered such fear and dread before. In the wilderness, anything can happen, and there is no telling what might occur. Some events leave such a profound impact that those with weaker hearts remain in a state of trauma for a long time. I had gone camping alone on a chilly night, setting up my tent by a serene lake. The tranquility and beauty of the lake completely captivated me. After a long day, I decided to enjoy some fishing. As darkness fell, I made my way to the water's edge, grabbing my fishing rod and flashlight. The lake's surface was perfectly still, shimmering under the moonlight. I was relishing the silence around me, with only the faint scent of leaves and the gentle sound of water lapping at the shore. After a while, I felt a tug on my fishing line. I carefully reeled it in and caught a small fish. It wasn't large, but it was enough for my dinner that night. Just as I was contemplating casting my line again, I suddenly heard a strange sound, a deep, guttural growl that filled me with dread. I slowly turned my flashlight toward the forest, but I couldn't see anything. Just as I was thinking that it might be just my imagination, a large shadow emerged from the darkness in front of me. It was a polar bear. Its white fur blended seamlessly with the night, but its eyes glimmered in the moonlight. Panic gripped me. I knew I had to remain completely calm, but the sheer size of the bear terrified me. I began to back away slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. However, the bear showed no signs of wanting to leave. It started to move closer, its powerful paws crunching on the snow. In a moment of sheer panic, I turned and ran. My heart raced as the cold air burned in my lungs. Each step felt like a jolt as I heard the bear crashing through the forest behind me. I was incredibly desperate, sprinting toward my campsite, hoping that my tent and gear would provide some form of protection. When I reached the campsite, I grabbed my only weapon, a small hunting knife. It seemed utterly inadequate against a bear, but it was all I had. I leaned against a large tree and turned to face the bear. It charged at me, and I crouched down, swinging the knife in the air. The blade grazed the bear's shoulder, eliciting an angry roar from it. The bear paused for a moment, taking a couple of steps closer as it glared at me. I thought it was all over, but then it hesitated for a brief moment, perhaps startled by the pain. Seizing the opportunity, I slowly began to back away, keeping the knife positioned in front of me. The bear took one last look at me before turning and retreating into the forest, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there trembling, overwhelmed by the realization that I had somehow survived. My heart was still racing, and my body felt drained from the adrenaline. I collapsed onto the ground, completely exhausted. I sat there for a long time, catching my breath and calming my nerves. Eventually, as my strength returned, I started to head back to my tent. I knew this night was one I would never forget, but the thought of being alive brought me some comfort. It was early morning, around 7 a.m., when I began packing up my campsite, ready to leave the forest behind. My hands were still trembling, and my heart raced as I drove away, recalling the fear I had felt. This camping trip could have turned deadly. This was my Duke of Edinburgh expedition, where I was joined by some friends in our group. We were all around 13 or 14 years old, and this was our first experience camping so far out in nature. The first day was challenging yet rewarding. We hiked, met new friends, and set up our tents in a remote area. As night fell, we lit a small fire and gathered around it, sharing jokes and stories. The stars twinkled in the sky, and the cool breeze made everything feel magical. We were happy, chatting until we grew tired and decided it was time to sleep. However, that night felt strange. For some reason, I sensed that something wasn't right. After a while, I noticed that Mark, one of our friends, was acting oddly in his sleeping bag. His face looked pale. We all tried to wake him up, but he wasn't joking around like he usually did. His breathing was very shallow, and he seemed to be unconscious. I remember the atmosphere was filled with panic. We made every effort to rouse him, but he just lay there unresponsive. That's when I realized this wasn't just fatigue. Something far more serious was happening. Panic spread among us. Someone said, "We didn't take emergency numbers. We have no phone or radio." There was no help coming from anywhere, and we were just looking around helplessly. Mark's condition was deteriorating rapidly, and we felt utterly powerless. It seemed like time had frozen, and our anxiety grew. Then we made a decision. We had to do something. We attempted to lift Mark, but he was very heavy. We took a moment to strategize so we could lift him more easily. With each other's help, we tried to support him as best we could. The journey was tough. Every step felt like a monumental task, but we had to push through. We encouraged each other and talked to keep our spirits up. With each step, our challenges grew, but our determination remained strong. Finally, we reached a road. My heart raced when I saw a car approaching. We all shouted for help together. The driver quickly understood that something serious was happening. He was ready to assist us immediately. He tried to call for medical help using his phone, and we worked together to get Mark inside a nearby house. Soon an ambulance arrived, and they began transporting Mark to the hospital. By the time Mark reached the hospital, we were all filled with anxiety. However, when we learned that he was suffering from severe dehydration and heat exhaustion, but would be okay, we breathed a sigh of relief. This entire experience forged a new bond among us and instilled a sense of responsibility for one another. We learned how crucial preparation is in the wilderness. The moment we helped each other will never be forgotten. What we did for Mark taught us that when we work together, we can face any challenge. We were just city kids, but that day showed us the strength we had in supporting one another. This journey became a memorable milestone that strengthened our friendship. My name is Jason, and I have always loved going into the wilderness. It has been a way for me to escape my thoughts and connect with myself. One day, I decided to go on a solo hike, aiming to find peace, and this time, I wanted to head towards the canal towpath. As I set out in the morning, the light was soft and hazy, and there was a freshness in the air. Being away from the hustle and bustle of our city gave me a sense of renewal. Tall grass lined the trail, and all I could hear were the scents of leaves and the distant sounds of chirping birds. My heart was happy, and I thought about how beautiful the day was going to be. However, shortly after I continued walking alone, I heard a strange noise in the distance. It sounded like some animals, but it was more of a barking sound that grew louder over time. I quickened my pace, feeling uneasy as I sensed that something unusual was happening. As I continued forward, I noticed some dark shapes moving between the trees. When I looked closer, I realized they were large, muscular dogs. Their fur was bristling, and they were all heading toward me. Not a sound escaped my lips. Panic and fear flooded my heart. In just a few moments, they surrounded me, their barking drowning out my thoughts. I was completely cornered. There was no way to escape. The canal towpath stretched on ahead, and there were no paths through the grass on either side. A thought raced through my mind. What should I do now? Just then I spotted a figure in the distance. It was a herder coming toward me, managing the dogs. He was running quickly, calling out to them with urgency. His shouts sparked a glimmer of hope in my heart. As he approached, he waved his hands to call the dogs, and within moments their attention shifted away from me. The panic in my heart gradually began to fade. The herder looked at me while managing his dogs and said, "You're going to be fine. They're just protective." I found great comfort in his words. As he started to control the dogs, my anxiety subsided. I felt a bit alone, but I was also grateful for the presence of a stranger. As the dogs followed him away, I reflected on how both haunting and memorable this experience was. That encounter could have put my life in danger. As I moved forward, I felt thankful for the herder. He had saved my life, and it made me think about how many dangers surround us that we often overlook. As I continued on my path, the images of those dogs and the herder kept replaying in my mind. The thought filled me with fear, but I was now mentally prepared for hiking again. So, I decided to end my trail for that day. As I walked along the edge of the canal, I realized that every moment in this journey of life tells a story. As long as we explore nature, we must understand its unpredictability. It served as a reminder that we are not only engaging with ourselves but also communicating with nature. I knew that I would never forget this encounter. It was summer, and I was thinking about going hiking. There's a different kind of energy in the body during summer. I preferred it over winter. One day, I planned a backpacking trip. I was supposed to go with friends, but for some reason, I ended up going alone. I had everything I needed: water, snacks, and a good flashlight. Little did I know that this trip would become one of the most memorable moments of my life. As I hiked a little distance before nightfall, I suddenly spotted a lone figure. He was wearing only shorts and a t-shirt and seemed to be wandering aimlessly. His face was filled with anxiety, and looking into his eyes made me realize that he was lost. It was nighttime, and darkness was creeping in. This was definitely not good. My heart began to race. I approached him and asked, "Is everything okay? What do you have?" He didn't respond verbally, he just looked down. His eyes revealed how troubled he was. When he saw me, he hesitated a bit, but I could tell he was very distressed. I saw that he had no backpack, no water, and no food. Just that small t-shirt and shorts were not enough for his survival. My heart ached for him. I wondered if he would spend the night here without any preparation. I tried to reason with him, but I knew I had to move on. I attempted to explain, "Hey, it's getting dark. You shouldn't stay here. You have nothing with you, and this is dangerous." He didn't say much, he just nodded his head. I walked away, but my concern remained with him. As the darkness of night deepened, my heart was filled with worry. When I reached my campsite, I tried to convince myself that I couldn't help him. I set up my shelter while thinking about what might have happened to that lone figure. The night passed slowly, but sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, his face appeared in my mind. The next morning, as I set out for my hike, I felt relieved to see park rangers talking to some people. When I asked them about the man, they informed me that he was safe, but quite shaken. They also mentioned that he had spent the night with another group who had given him water and food. I felt a great sense of relief. However, it made me reflect on how a person could find themselves in such a risky situation. It was indeed a dangerous scenario to be isolated with nothing around you. Just thinking about it could be overwhelming, especially with the open wilderness surrounding you. To this day, whenever I go hiking, I make sure to carry essential items with me, not just for myself, but for others as well. I realized how crucial preparation is in the wilderness. The purpose of a hike isn't just about personal enjoyment, it also involves looking out for those around us. This incident reminds me that preparation is essential before every hike. It was a beautiful summer evening when my friends and I arrived at our campsite in the Colorado mountains. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine filled our lungs as we unpacked our gear and set up our tent. We had chosen a secluded spot near a small creek, surrounded by towering trees that whispered in the gentle breeze. It was the perfect escape from our busy lives, a chance to reconnect with nature and each other. After a long day of hiking and exploring, we decided to head into town for dinner. We laughed and reminisced over a hearty meal, excitement building for our first night camping in this stunning location. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. When we returned to our campsite, the stars twinkled overhead, and the world felt perfect. However, our euphoria quickly faded. As we approached our tent, we noticed that the flap was slightly open. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. I called out to my friends, and we hurried over to investigate. The sight that met us was unsettling. Our belongings were scattered across the ground, and it was clear that someone had rummaged through our stuff. "What the hell?" I muttered, trying to make sense of it. My heart raced. We had locked our valuables in the car, but it was still disturbing to think someone had invaded our space. "Do you think it was a bear?" One of my friends speculated nervously, but deep down, I felt it was something worse. Bears typically left evidence of their presence: paw prints, fur, or food wrappers. This felt human. My instincts were on high alert, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. We decided to wash up in the creek to wash away the unsettling experience of finding our campsite disturbed. The water was cold but refreshing. Laughter broke the tension as we splashed each other playfully, trying to forget our earlier worries. However, as we dried off, I felt a nagging sense of unease. "Let's head back to camp," I suggested, glancing towards the tree line across the stream. That's when I saw it, a shadow moving among the trees, still as a statue, watching us. My heart sank. "I think there's someone over there," I whispered to my friends, trying to keep my voice steady. Their laughter faded, replaced by silence as they followed my gaze. "Are you sure?" one of them asked, squinting into the darkness. "Yes, I'm sure," I replied, trying to suppress the rising panic in my chest. The figure remained motionless, almost blending in with the shadows. "Let's get back to the car," another friend urged, and we quickly made our way back, adrenaline pumping through our veins. We huddled inside the car, hearts racing. The warmth of the vehicle felt like a temporary sanctuary, but the fear of what lurked outside was palpable. After a few moments of silence, we tried to convince ourselves it was nothing. "Maybe it was just an animal," one friend suggested, but I wasn't buying it. We locked the doors and turned off the lights, hoping to blend into the night. But the feeling of dread hung heavy in the air. Hours passed, and we tried to relax, but sleep eluded us. Then just as I began to doze off, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. My heart raced as I peered out the window, and there it was, the figure, crouched near the entrance of our tent. It was close enough that I could make out its outline, a shadowy figure inspecting our belongings. I couldn't breathe. I felt frozen in place, my heart pounding in my chest. "Wake up! Wake up!" I hissed, shaking my friends awake. They groggily stirred, eyes wide with confusion. What's happening?" one friend mumbled, still half asleep. "There's someone by the tent," I whispered urgently, my voice barely above a breath. In an instant, they were alert. We all peered through the car windows, and horror washed over us as we watched the figure stand up slowly, almost casually, and look directly at us. My stomach dropped. Without thinking, I reached for the horn and honked loudly. The sound echoed through the night, shattering the stillness. To my relief, the figure darted back into the woods, disappearing into the shadows. "Did you see that?" one of my friends exclaimed. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know, but we need to get out of here," I replied, adrenaline surging through me. We quickly gathered our things, our hearts racing as we shoved everything into the car. Just before we drove away, I took one last look at the campsite. The tent, our belongings scattered across the ground, felt like a tainted memory. As we sped down the winding roads away from the campground, the fear slowly faded into disbelief. We had escaped, but the encounter haunted us. The excitement of our camping trip had transformed into an unsettling memory, one that would linger long after we left the mountains behind. We opted for a hotel that night, thankful for the security of locked doors and the comfort of solid walls. Although our adventure had taken a terrifying turn, we knew we'd find another time to explore the wilderness. Just maybe not in the same way again.